pleased to welcome you to the guests come from around Europe and from the United States.
In Paris-Saclay on the occasion of the Trade and Technology Council for the stakeholder panel. I'm Mélanie Voin, I'm the spokesperson for the French Treasury. We have today many high-level panelists to exchange on two topics. First, the priorities for the future work of the TTC in trade and how to better secure supply chains. Second, on how the TTC can facilitate the green and digital transitions. We have here on stage Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Vestager, Dombrovskis, and Commissioner Breton. And we have, for the US, we have Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, and US Trade Representative Katherine, and Undersecretary José Fernandez here with us. And we have some panelists who will be joining us online. And for the audience online, you also have interpretation available if it goes into French as well. We don't have much time and a lot of topics to cover, so I'll ask the participants to be a bit mindful of time. But first, I'll give the floor to Sandrine Gaudin, the Secretary General of the General Secretariat for European Affairs from the French government.
Madame la Secrétaire au Commerce, Madame la
Secretary of Commerce, Representative of U.S. Trade Representative, Executive Vice President, Ms. Vestager, Executive Vice President, Mr. Dombrovskis. Thank you for attending this meeting today, this beautiful campus of Paris-Saclay Training Center and Research Center. It is an outstanding school here in France and of world renown as well. It is a pleasure, therefore, to welcome you here in this campus, a school that carries out a great deal of research and work addressing many of our collective challenges, such as, of course, climate change and the development of green technologies, or even a number of other important topics related to the use of new technologies. This school is very much at the heart of the topics that have been discussed by you this morning and which we will be discussing again this afternoon. We are truly honored to welcome in this second CCT Council in France as part of the French Presidency of the Council of the EU. This Trade and Technology Council is of the utmost importance for cooperation and the dialogue between the United States, the European Commission, and the European Union. It is our hope that in welcoming you here, the CCT, we can ensure the mobilization of member states in this very important cooperation and dialogue in the challenges we are facing today. The issues of the second CCT were also, or TTC rather, were at the heart of the French presidency of the previous months, including the ministerial meeting of trade ministers in Brussels, in Marseille a few months ago, and they have discussed these issues through different meetings. It is our hope and ambition to see how to implement all of the measures taken. And that is why we wanted to express the importance of these issues by welcoming the second meeting of this transatlantic TTC Council in France, such as was the case during the first meeting in Pittsburgh last year. We wanted to set aside a discussion time with these stakeholders, not just for because this is our habit, but because we truly think this is the time to promote a mobilization of all stakeholders, whether we're talking about representatives of trade unions, companies, think tanks in this exercise, so that we can help facilitate and contribute to the good functioning of this TTC Council. Today, we are also hosting a great many of these stakeholders in this room today, and I would like to wholeheartedly thank them for attending this meeting, either here in person or through the video conference platform. As Mélanie just said, we will discuss different topics, including the future priorities of this Trade and Technology Council dialogue in the area of trade and, of course, of securing value chains. And during our discussions, we will also talk about the digital and the green transition at the heart of our concerns. So without further ado, I'd like to again launch the beginning of this discussion, and thank you, Madam U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Madam U.S. Trade Representative, Executive Vice President Vestager, Executive VP of Dombrovskis, Mr. Commissioner, for coming right up to Saclay. This is a very important venue. It is the venue of the second meeting of this TTC meeting. I'd like to wish you fruitful discussions, and it is our hope that we will be able to ensure specific and efficient follow-up to this meeting as part of the French Presidency of the Council of the EU and as part of the Council works. Thank you very much indeed, and I wish you a great meeting today.
Merci, Sandrine. We'll start with the first topic.
Thank you, Sandrine.
So the priorities for the future work of the TTC in trade and how to better secure supply chains. And I'll give the floor to Executive Vice President Vestager and U.S. Ambassador Tai.
Oui, mais bien sûr, et merci beaucoup.
Indeed, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for this warm welcoming, and so appropriate. We've just celebrated the work done by the working groups and the stakeholders until now, and then we start discussing next chapter. So there is no rest for anyone. But I want to thank the presidency here at Saclay to give us this opportunity to see, a European, innovative, bursting environment, a world-class university, creating the circumstance for, really personal exchanges on behalf of our constituencies, creating the necessary trust. Because that, I think, is the magic of the Trade and Technology Council. It is people coming together to enable institutions to work in the best possible way to serve our stakeholders. Because the success of the TTC is the ownership from stakeholders in all the variety, NGOs, unions, business representatives. If there is no ownership, the TTC doesn't really exist. And the first subject here, I think, is really top of mind for everyone, because everyone has seen the fallout that comes from unsecure supply chains that doesn't work. And this is why not only should we prevent new shortages, but we should also see how can we strengthen supply chains that we know are secure, that have their starting points in areas where we trust that supply can continue. And one of the results that we have achieved is the Strategic Standardization Information Mechanism, because part of having a supply chain is also that standards are being set in a way that you can rely on. So this appreciation of the US and the EU engaging to make sure that standards are set, that we engage where it's priority, and fully engage our stakeholder community in doing so, I think that is key. Second, to have, a step up of our efforts with the trade and technology dialogue, which we will still soon start to communicate with you. And last but not least, to be very specific, the two areas where we focus is the supply chain when it comes to semiconductors and the supply chain when it comes to raw materials. And this is, of course, a really, really short, window into the discussions that we have had. But I hope that you will feel in our dialogue here today that it is the real state of mind. It is that we are here to enable, and the proof of the TTC is that you see that this is relevant. You have to do your thing, you have to lean in, you have to take responsibility, but we can enable good things to happen in a world that is challenged as never before. When we started the TTC, never would we have imagined that there would be a war in Europe in the second meeting. So had we not had the TTC, we would have had to invent it. But with your encouragement, of course, we think we can go higher in our ambitions and deeper in our cooperation. So thank you very much for coming today, both online and in person here in this beautiful auditorium. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. All right. Well, I want to begin by thanking the Executive Vice Presidents, Dombrovskis and Vestager, for hosting us in France today, and Commissioner Breton as well. I also want to thank our gracious host from Paris-Saclay, Mr. Zalio, who I think I saw a bit earlier and I know is here. Let me begin by saying the Biden administration's worker-centered trade policy is founded on a commitment to incorporate the perspectives of the broadest range of stakeholders, those who have traditionally had a seat at the table, and pulling up chairs and making sure that we have new seats at the table for those who have not felt traditionally included. When we hear from our workers, from our civil society representatives, and from our business leaders, large and small, we can design more inclusive and durable trade policies. And that's why this session, I feel strongly, and I know this is shared across these tables, really forms one of the core pieces of the TTC, and is perhaps one of the TTC's most important innovations. The timing of this ministerial is also crucial, and I'll just point out things that we all already know. We have all experienced significant disruptions in global trade and the global economy, from 2+ years of the COVID pandemic to more recently Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I think what this means is that we have a lot of work in front of us, and as we work together to recover from short-term shocks, we also need to keep our eye on the medium and long-term work that we need to do. The events and the disruptions that we've experienced have really revealed some structural vulnerabilities to the way that we have been doing business and the way that we have been conducting our international economic policy. I think that in terms of the approaches we need to take going forward, it will require new investments in our infrastructure, in building out the industrial base in strategic sectors, including increased domestic manufacturing, along with strengthening trade and investment partnerships with key allies and trusted partners like the EU and the US. We also need to address the supply chain vulnerabilities that have been exposed specifically by Russia's invasion, including looking at reducing dependencies on Russian fossil fuels and minerals. Tackling these issues will improve our supply chain resilience while also increasing the economic pressure on Russia. I want to also highlight an existing and persistent challenge that we face too to our supply chain resiliency that comes from China. And through China's state-centered approach to the economy and trade, we see China employing industrial policies that provide unfair competitive advantages to its companies, seeking to displace foreign competitors and to dominate domestic and global markets. In all of these areas, I think that the TTC demonstrates that it is a timely and important vehicle to help us address this range of challenges, and we cannot do it alone. We must do it with all of you, and I'm delighted to be here today.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Tai. Now I'll give the floor to our panelists who are here. First, I will have Marcus Bayer from Business Europe.
Merci, Melanie. And
Thank you, Melanie.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me first thank you for the opportunity to address you today. Pittsburgh was great, but it's so much better in real life. So it's really a pleasure to see you in 3D. The business community on both sides of the Atlantic has been calling for such a format since many years. We are happy that it exists, and I think the events, and Vice President has alluded to it, show us that we really need it. And I'm happy to say and to see that it's already delivered concretely. The way we have coordinated sanctions between the US and Europe is also a deliverable of this TTC, and this is key, because this is about a level playing field, and as much as, of course, this is also causing economic pain, especially to European companies, we fully stand behind these necessary sanctions. We now think that we need to build upon this momentum to explore new areas of cooperation that can lead to concrete outcomes in order to boost the transatlantic economy. And together with our friends from the US Chamber, our partners, and I'm happy to see that Myron made it just on time, that we have pointed out a couple of concrete deliverables we would like to see coming out of this dialogue going forward. One of them is that we think, and we have showed that we can do, is that we need joint approaches to export controls. This is vital for our common security needs. Energy security, of course, has always been a challenge, but recent events has shown that, this is the key challenge for all of us now, and the answer lies in close cooperation to overcome short-term energy needs, alternatives to Russian oil and gas, but also to work together for long-term zero, but also low-carbon energy solutions, clearly including nuclear. What is also crucial is, of course, raw materials and components. We need security of supply here because we will need this going forward, and this is something I would like to underline. This is key for this cooperation because we will need to secure the access to these critical raw materials, and there this cooperation has a key role to play. But supply chain security is also about the access to global markets. Therefore, we need to promote regulatory cooperation, conformity assessment, reduce trade barriers bilaterally, transatlantically, but also multilaterally, so we will need to also keep the WTO on track. And last but not least, of course, what is very important for the transatlantic business community is the security of data flows. So we are grateful for the in-principle agreement that has been found, and we're looking forward to a concrete and final solution for the long term. In any case, the business community stands ready to work with you, and going forward, we would welcome if this engagement with the stakeholders becomes even more structural than it has been so far, and we stand ready to improve it and work with you together. Thank you very much for the intention, and thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll call to the podium Peter Chase from the German Marshall Fund.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and be here with you. The German Marshall Fund is an organization dedicated to promoting transatlantic cooperation, which the TTC embodies. And I'd like to very quickly make 4 points. One, I think it's important that all of the work of the TTC is driven by the awareness that our relationship, our economic relationship, is based on investment, not on trade. Investment, we've got $3.7 trillion of US investment here. In all of Europe, 2.5 of that's with the EU. The EU's investment in the United States all Europe is $3 trillion. It's 2.1 trillion of EU investment from the EU 27. This is a huge number, and it matters, and it has implications for all of our policy decisions. In that sense, I think it's really important that concepts that appear to create walls rather than bridges between us can be really problematic. And they can be problematic precisely because it is the investment that draws the trade between us. And that relationship means that if we are talking about things that might reduce opportunities for government procurement or that are technology sovereignty, things like this, if they actually get in the way of our relationship, that becomes a problem. The third point is I'd like to we need to avoid unintended consequences because we're not thinking about this integrated economy. And I'd like to take the electric vehicles industry as an example, because we need the electric vehicles to meet our climate goals, our climate ambitions. We also need, this is a place where a lot of the scarcity and supply chain problems are coming up. And the third thing, really importantly, is this is an industry where China got into it for domestic demand, not just export push. So I think that we need to acknowledge that some of the things that we've done and that we are doing is almost creating a demand here for electric vehicles, which we're going to see a huge swing up in Chinese exports here. We've already had it just this last year. Then the final thing to say is that I think that it's important for us as we're going forward to make sure that we, in the TTC in particular, is trying to make sure that all of these working groups are not working in silos, but are working together. That the Council itself has the job of ensuring that all of the work we're doing in high-tech or export controls or investment screening, that it is all a coherent and part of a coherent whole. And I look forward to seeing the results of your deliberations today, because I hope that you'll prove that you're doing that coordination. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now call Klaus Michael Stoll from ETUC.
So let me start by saying how happy I am to be at this stakeholder event today, but standing I also realize how nice it is to be among humans and not in front of a screen. So the work within the transatlantic dialogue has really been dynamic since Pittsburgh, and I'm convinced that a strong involvement of stakeholders will make the TTC a continuing success with tangible results. The European Trade Union Confederation has been working hand in hand with the AFL-CIO, and we have also put forward a joint statement which is available on our websites. And there we also highlight our priorities for the work ahead. And Katie Feingold will also, from the AFL-CIO, will also speak later today. And we see the TTC as a good opportunity to do trade differently and to put workers' interests at the center. But going back to the main topics of this event, supply chains and the green and digital transition, I would like to make the following 3 points. First, trade is in a transformative process. Trade is increasingly unpredictable, and it's not what it used to be, as some people would say. There seems to be several crises at the same time, including a supply and demand crisis. But there is also a collapse of a business model. Just in time seems increasingly to be an idea of the past. So global trade needs new ideas, and TTC is the creative way forward. Secondly, supply chains need to change. Forced labor and worker exploitation must be stopped, not only because they are morally wrong. It is also a business model that represents the past. Binding due diligence and stronger labor clauses are ways forward. Let us address these problems jointly within the TTC. Thirdly, let's be realistic. Progress in green and digital transitions is crucial, but historic high levels of inequality might ruin it all. So future trade agreements must also address inequality. Thanks for your attention. That was 2 minutes.
And finally, we'll have Andrea Renda from the think tank CEPS.
Merci, Melanie, and thanks a lot for inviting me to this very, very important meeting. I'm going to say 4 things as quickly as possible. The first one is I believe cooperation and research and development will be an essential element and should be an essential element of the TTC. In my opinion, one of the key areas where we need to step up cooperation and research immediately is semiconductors, where there is a lot to be done to catch up with existing market developments at the global level. And there, I think the idea that was floated by some academics on the creation of a semiconductor commons, joint pre-competitive space where Europe and the United States companies can share facilities, equipment, and demonstration, which is sometimes what creates the problem in what we call the valley of death from lab to fab. We need to do that quickly. Second, even this level of ambition is not going to be sufficient if we don't take a holistic approach to value chains. In the recent trip that I had in Argentina, I saw in the same day 300 cameras being deployed in Buenos Aires for surveillance, and one of the last available lithium mines being acquired by a Chinese company. Commissioner Vestager, not Vice President, but Commissioner, because I'm talking about competition, knows very well how difficult it is to compete against a bundled offer if you're not able to fully replicate it. We need a fully fledged technology stack, and only together we can achieve that. Now, to add to the difficulty, this fully fledged technology stack has to be at the same time also inclusive and respectful of workers' rights and sustainable. So I would say what the European Commission is doing at the moment in developing the notion of Industry 5.0 along three main pillars, human-centric, resilient, and sustainable industry, could be a good starting point for mutual cooperation in this field. And finally, the last one is an announcement. As of today, I start a new adventure that hopefully will be helpful for all of us and all of you. I will be coordinating the so-called Trade and Technology Dialogue, which is funded by the EU. It is run by SEPS, but also by the European University Institute, by the Istituto Affari Internazionali, by Forum Europe, and by the Providence Group in the United States. So we will offer a platform for stakeholders to convey their concerns, ideas, and a sounding board for the proposals that will be developed by the leaders of the TTC. I'll stop there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And Myron Brilliant from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Good morning, stakeholders. I'm very pleased to be here. In fact, wasn't sure I was going to make it, given my flight was 2.5 hours late in from Washington, D.C. Let me commend the principals from the United States and the EU for hosting this summit and this stakeholder session. And let me start by recognizing the well-coordinated response between Europe and the United States in addressing the unprovoked action by Russia in Ukraine. So I want to start with that. 6 ways that we do need to work together. Ambassador Tai referenced the reduced dependency on Russia. We think we need to increase U.S. energy exports to Europe, consistent with what President Biden and President von der Leyen made in their January commitment to create an enabling environment for energy production and trade. We need to advance energy transition by working with partners worldwide to increase production of strategic minerals used in electric vehicles, wind turbines, and other green tech. Global production of these strategic minerals must rise by 500% by 2030 to meet these goals. And we've got to work with partners in a way that these resources are used to create or not create dependency on any one country. Second, and something I wanted to add more recently, we need to reduce or redouble efforts against export restrictions as our governments are doing at the WTO. I make this point in particular with respect to food. It is just announced export ban on wheat is exactly what we want to avoid worldwide. Export restrictions will translate today's tight food supplies into a global hunger crisis, something that I think deserves a lot of attention from the EU and the United States. Third, semiconductors. We need to boost production for sure. We need to work together on the very expensive basic research behind chip development with IMEC, the EU entity, and the U.S. National Semiconductor Technology Center, which I know is still in formation, taking the lead. Fourth, China. Certainly a priority of the EU and the United States via the TTC. We need to address a number of Chinese challenges, including industrial subsidies, digital protectionism, export controls, forced tech transfer, and competition policy. We urge at the U.S. Chamber for the United States and EU in a coordinated, timely, meaningful way to address collective concerns create new commercial markets for businesses and workers that are insulated from third country market distortions, and begin restoring credibility to the multilateral trading system. Efforts to rein in China's unfair actions should be done in a coordinated way so companies in both markets are working off a level playing field and playing by the same rules. And this will increase the impact and ensure we don't send inconsistent messages. Fifth, digital. Finalizing the new transatlantic data privacy framework as soon as possible will not only ensure the United States and Europe are working on the same agenda, but it will ensure that we secure data flows. We double down on commitments made at Pittsburgh Ministerial regarding non-discrimination in digital regulation. And I would here say that Marcus at Business Europe and the United States Chamber have worked closely, not only on that, but the other set of issues as well. Let me just say at the end, my sixth factor is stakeholder engagement. Today's session is clearly very important. Ongoing two-way engagement is key to realistic and durable outcomes. The private sector has to be a part of the solution. We support strong coordination and stakeholder outreach that is transparent and inclusive of different interests, even when our parties are not always aligned. So working together, United States and Europe, business and government can address our biggest challenges, and there's no time to waste in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now jump to questions from Undersecretary Fernandez and Commissioner Breton to our panelists. I'll give you the floor, Mr. Undersecretary Fernandez. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me just start by saying that I share most of the comments made, except one, I guess, the comparison of Pittsburgh versus Paris. You've never been to the Susquehanna River. Well, I commend it. The question that I guess as Myron was just talking now about the need for stakeholder engagement, and that is critical, and that's something that we all realize that we need to do. I guess my question is specifically, how would you suggest that we reach out to those who are either indifferent to this work or who are opposed to it, or in order to be able to convince them? We need to institutionalize. I think it's something we've all agreed on. How do we institutionalize the TTC with stakeholders? How do we reach those who may not be our natural allies on this? Thank you.
Is that directed to a particular person or all of us?
To all of you.
If maybe one person can take the floor.
I can take it, obviously, for what I just said, that I will be coordinating this platform that is meant to the benefit of both sides of the Atlantic. And it's a platform where we will create several streams of exchange with stakeholders along the 10 working groups. And we will try to make sure that ideas that are emerging are put together, and we try to make sure that stakeholders find their voice in this process. And as I was saying, we plan to have it a two-way, meaning from decision makers on to stakeholders as a sounding board, right, to gather feedback, and at the same time from stakeholders, ideas that decision makers might take into account in the work of the different working groups. We haven't started yet. Well, we'll start this week. So hopefully I will have many more details on this as we, just in a few days from now. But this is exactly why the Trade and Technology Dialogue is being set up.
Maybe one word from my side. I mean, this is the million-dollar question. I mean, how do we make trade sexy again? How do we make the transatlantic partnership? And I think the Commission did a great job in showing the tangible outcome of certain trade agreements. And I think we need to do the same thing here. To explain to people, I mean, why our dialogue led to improvements in, for instance, being coordinated in sanctions and other things, and then come up with the concrete examples.
Thank you. Commissioner Breton.
Un petit mot en français d'abord.
A word in French, briefly, to thank the French Presidency of the EU for hosting us today, for organizing this session, to host the TTC. Thanks to you all for this widely appreciated effort, appreciated by all our colleagues here. I'll switch to English.
And maybe come back on one of the topics that we discussed heavily yesterday evening and today. which is the supply chain and the security of our supplies. And of course, this is becoming more and more an issue. We realized this during the pandemic. Of course, now with the war of Ukraine, and if we look at what happened now in China, we see that it will become more and more important. And in this endeavor, we decided together, we have a structural reflection on how to better equip all of us from both sides of the Atlantic in some critical part. You mentioned semiconductors, but we have other topics which are extremely critical to make sure that we'll be able to cope with this situation. In other words, it may require more supply chain transparency and openness from industry in terms of supply, demand, and also production capacity, including, by the way, sharing information in a specific time. Concrete measures also to absorb a surge in demand, and finally, a concrete measure to secure input of material. So I think we'll be very interested to hear from you. First, what do you expect from us, and how do you prepare yourself also in this specific issue, which will become more and more important, and we call it, by the way, the new geopolitics of supply chains.
Thank you. One of you? Yeah.
Is this working? Yes, it is working. Yes. So from a trade union perspective, I guess the fact what we have now, we hope that it will be the result of today is that we have the transatlantic labor dialogue, and just having us here today, I think is a very good beginning of everything, because it makes us feel safe about our engagement, which also means that we now can focus on content in different issues. And from the trade union side, I can tell that we are very much looking forward to creative discussions on how to protect workers in the world of AI, on platform works, and on standards, and many other things. So we're looking forward to the content of discussions now when we're behind the formal procedures. So again, thank you for having us here today, and we're going to be very creative, trust us.
Yeah, from my side, three elements. I mean, first, I think as far as Europe is concerned, we have a very good exchange with the Commission, DG Growth specifically on a weekly basis, to specify where the problems lie and to get answers. So this is very welcome. Thank you for this. Number two, of course, the hope is that the transatlantic cooperation will amplify this so that we will be able to join forces in order to make sure that certain accesses are secured. And the third point, to your question specifically, and we understand, of course, the Commission is going to come up with proposals here, and I think it's justified, of course, to do these things differently. At the same time, of course, business has always been sensitive about sharing information. So I think once the proposal is there, we will need to find the right balance, what is necessary in this new world to do differently, and how far is there still justified aims of protection, be it IP or others. But I'm pretty sure going forward and in constructive debates, we'll find the right balance in order to find the right answer for the new challenges we're facing. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have 3 questions from the audience. Laurence Nardon from IFRI. Maybe we can take the question from someone online. The microphone is here for the questions, sorry. Eric Marc Huitema, the director of the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. If you want to ask your question to either our panelists or one of the secretaries or ambassadors or commissioners, please go ahead. Sorry, we don't have the sound.
Perfect.
But now, yeah.
Thank you very much. I think it's really important, if you look at the supply chain, that we see the combination of what is happening in the supply chain and what is happening in the green transformation and the digital transformation we're trying to go through. And we really worked together closely with our friends across the ocean the people who are in the associations also at the American side to try to harmonize this all together. In our view, the three elements really go together. And when you look at the goal that we have in the automotive industry to move to zero emission mobility in 2030, 2040 and 2050, and really see this gradual change, we really need to make sure that the supply chain is supporting that change. The change that will enable and is now disrupted because of semiconductors, because of the war in Ukraine. And I think the transatlantic cooperation and also being more resilient is really important. So that's my opening statement, and I just want to hear from you, from the panelists, how you can help the automotive industry to make that change. And then I come back, if I may, later on the digital change and the supply chain reliability.
Look, I think I can jump in here. On the auto industry, there is no question that this is a priority for the U.S. government. It's also it's a priority for the U.S. private sector to make sure that our companies are getting the materials, the minerals. I referenced it in my opening statement. That means to me that we're going to have to find new ways to produce some of the minerals, find new sources, new markets. We're going to have to diversify away from Russia, which is already underway, and China in that regard, to ensure we rise production to meet the needs, to make sure that we have the access that we need for electric vehicles. I mean, whether we're talking about lithium or other materials and minerals, we have rare earths. We've got a real challenge, and we've got to work the private sector with our government. I would just say 3 points that kind of blend your question with the Commissioner's point. One is standards have to be right. The United States and Europe have been working on these issues off and on. Peter Chase, Marcus, and I have been involved in so many dialogues over 25 years in this area, and we have not made enough progress in the area of harmonizing standards and recognizing mutual recognition of standards. This is a priority if you're going to talk about supply chains and progress in the EU-US relationship. The second point I'd make is clearly we got to get rid of bottlenecks in the supply chain, and I like the term friend allies when it comes to friendshoring, looking at new ways of production and manufacturing that brings ingenuity from the United States and Europe together and has the support of both Europe and the United States to do that. So there are many things that we can do together, and I hope that the dialogue here will advance that cause.
We'll go to the next question. Laurence Nardon, apologies, head of the North America program from the French Institute of International Relations.
Yes, thank you. I'm very glad to be here. It's an honor. My question is quite wide, actually, and I don't know if it's for these gentlemen or more for the panelists. I want to address the elephant in the room, which is, from what I've heard in the past half hour, the future of free trade. Because in the TTC, you're addressing the supply chain for semiconductors and raw materials. That's what you said, Mrs. Stein. But we also, and these products are deemed strategic. But we also know that public opinions in the US and in Europe are also pushing for a reshoring of the production of products that are not deemed strategic, maybe cars or whatnot, we don't know. So what is really the future of free trade? Are we going to have a distinction between products that are strategic and that we will agree to reshore, or reshore their production, and other products that will not be strategic and will be continuing to be dealt with in the ancient free trade manner? How far are you willing to go to limit free trade? Is this the end of, especially in the EU, what we've been pushing for all these decades, free trade?
Maybe, yeah.
If I may come in on this question. Well, I think the answer is clear to this question, I would dare to say, on both sides of the Atlantic. Well, in the EU, we have already more than a year ago adopted new EU trade policy strategy, where we reconfirm our commitment for open, fair, and rules-based trade. And we set basically three priorities for our trade policy. First, it's openness. Second, it's sustainability, how we can green our trade policy, how we can address environmental and social challenges in a framework of a trade policy. And third is assertiveness. So while remaining open for free and fair trade, we know that we are getting into more conflictual geopolitical landscape, and correspondingly we must have tools to address possible actions of our trading partners which are not in line with our international trading rules. That's why we are strengthening our toolbox to defend ourselves with autonomous measures. So to summarize, we are willing to act multilaterally whenever we can, but we must be ready to act unilaterally if we must.
If I may just add a quick word here, I think what Valdis has said is very sensible. The kinds of objectives that we pursue in our trade policies have to take into account our experience with that trade policy. And we have to be able to learn lessons. In terms of what I like to call the version of globalization that we are experiencing have been the last couple decades to today, if we call that globalization 1.0, I think that we tended to think about free trade as almost an end in itself. Free trade and free markets really are tools. They serve larger purposes. And I think that's something we should remember. To the extent that our free trade program earlier had served a larger purpose, it was probably to enable firms to chase and maximize efficiencies. And the idea was the more efficiency you could have, the fewer barriers for capital, the more you could allow for the free flow of capital, that the more peace and prosperity we would have. And I think that that program has been successful. There has been a huge growth in prosperity. There has been a long period of peace that we've experienced in the last couple decades. But referencing the disruptions that I've commented on, that whether it's triggered by COVID and the pandemic, to the outbreak of war on the European continent, I think we need to take into account these lessons and think about how do we harness our trade policy tools, our collaboration, how do we bring a new approach to allow for our trade policies to serve the purposes of resilience, sustainability, exactly as Valdis says, and what kinds of guardrails, what kinds of parameters do we need to place on our international economic system. And I'd say that as we are looking at resilience and sustainability, we also see on the side of capital an increasing self-reflection about whether or not our firms have purposes beyond profit maximization, and whether or not our firms have purposes to promote sustainability and resilience with respect to our climate, our planet, and our people.
Thank you. One sentence? One.
Yeah, no, just because it's also partly an answer to the car question. Of course, the risk of supply chain disruption will have an impact on investment decisions up to a certain extent, but of course, at the end, it will be and has to be company decisions. And let me just also add that supply chain resilience has a lot to do with diversification. And for diversification, we will need even more free trade and not less, because otherwise we'll not be able to diversify our supply chains.
Thank you. And we have one last question from Jimmy Goodrich from the Semiconductor Industry Association.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's actually exciting to hear that semiconductors are rightly on top of the agenda for the TTC. They underpin virtually every facet of our modern society, as the pandemic has shown. And the US and the EU collectively overall are a semiconductor powerhouse, accounting for more than half of the global market, half of all total research development, and around a third of global chip production capacity. So while the immediate challenge of today is rightly the ongoing shortage, in fact, the semiconductor industry shipped a record 1 trillion chips last year, we should also be thinking about the challenges of tomorrow that we face from both a EU and US perspective. So the global geopolitical headwinds have shown that we face tremendous vulnerabilities in our supply chain related to semiconductors. In fact, 80% of the manufacturing capacity is in East Asia, 100% of the leading edge capacity is in East Asia. The good news is that both the US and the United States are preparing CHIPS Acts, and that will bring to bear significant resources that allow us to address these challenges. And we're excited, and of course, we urge immediate passage. So the question then, to I guess the principals or the panelists, is how can transatlantic industry and government together jointly conduct realistic scenario planning for future potential shocks? We know about the shocks of today, but those tomorrow, including geopolitical, that our industry might be facing. How can we be better prepared for the next crisis that may come? And then briefly, second, we heard about research development. I'm glad to hear already proposals for IMEC in Belgium or the future National Semiconductor Technology Center to work together. But the NSTC is not yet established, and how can we work together today, now, with agencies in the US, industry together, for example, around semiconductors for green technology, for around joint research development? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Maybe Commissioner Breton?
Yes, no. First, we have to recognize that the market in semiconductor will double in the next decade. So it means, in other words, that all the semiconductor manufacturing companies need to increase their capacity of production. And it is an opportunity for us, both the US and the EU, to say, why don't you do this in the US or in the EU? And this is our plan. In other words, we decided that, for example, I speak for you, Gina, but I think your objective is to be able to produce 30% of the global production in the US, and for us it's 20%. And we'll do this again within the next 8-9 years. The second thing is that, of course, we are doing this being totally coordinated. We will, by the way, support cutting-edge technologies, and that's a big investment, but we will also enhance our R&D. And that's extremely important because, as you mentioned, we are pretty strong in R&D, but we need to maintain our advance. So last point regarding your question is, yes, it's true that IMEC is pretty advanced, but by the way, we are welcoming in Europe almost all companies in the world coming to partner and to make a part of their research in IMEC. May take a while to do the same thing in the US, but we are very happy to exchange everything we do. And by the way, do not forget, we have also for low energy consumption semiconductors, LETI in Grenoble, where we are manufacturing very advanced technologies for very low consumption semiconductors. And we want also to enhance our packaging capacities with Fraunhofer. So we have, of course, IMEC, but not only. And we are working now to have all architecture of R&D in Europe. And of course, we are working in close contact with our US partners.
Thank you. Maybe just one comment to complement what Thierry said, and I stand by that, of course, 100%. I think there is an important discussion when it comes to research, because there is only that many world-class ecosystem or environments. And it's really important that we think about synergies here, because it's in the US CHIPS Act, there is also foreseen more research funding. But we should try to build stronger, even stronger research environment also in a transatlantic perspective, and not think about existing environments being cut in two. Because cutting research environments in two doesn't just half the efforts, it quarters the efforts. because the synergies are everything here. So I think it's really important to raise points that we keep considering how can we push the research community also to have a transatlantic perspective with more funding actually being made available.
Thank you. If you want, Undersecretary, concluding remarks for this this topic, and maybe Mr. Dombrovskis as well, or
on the topic of semiconductors.
This first topic, if you have any concluding remarks.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the host. It's wonderful to be here. The input, the feedback, the buy-in of stakeholders is critical to the success of the TTC, and frankly, we won't get very far without it, so this is important. This discussion has underscored the important issues at the forefront of our trade and investment relationship. It's a trade and investment relationship to which we are deeply committed, and the TTC is an important mechanism for building and advancing this cooperation both inside and outside this forum. One example that we've had many examples. One example of our collaboration is that I think that you've seen the renewed trust that we have, and you've also seen the advanced work in the TTC on supply chain disruptions, on semiconductors, rare earths. Myron mentioned that, and solo supply chains. I think we recognize the challenge, and I do think in future meetings and in future months, you will see very specific projects going forward. Look, when we look at the original task of the TTC that puts forth a compelling vision for global trade and technology, for free trade is part of it, but it is worker-centered trade in a way that serves our people, protects our interests, and promotes democratic values and our innovation. It's 8 months later since Pittsburgh. It's clear that we stand together and that we defend shared values that have been accepted for 75 years and are now at risk because of Russia's further invasion of Ukraine. The close cooperation that you've seen between the US and the EU on things like disinformation, on export controls, frankly would have taken a much longer time to happen without the TTC. So you're already seeing results. And our focus on supply chains today brings us into sharp focus. We have a problem. We recognize we have a problem both in semiconductors and in critical minerals. We need to find a solution. Our work here can help to unlock economic opportunities. This is both a business opportunity, an opportunity for our businesses, but it's also a strategic imperative, and the TTC is very much aware of that. So I think you will see on supply chains continued engagement, real progress, and we will look forward to coming back here and engaging with TTC stakeholders on both sides. And the proof will be in the pudding, as we say. You will need to see results, and we intend to provide results because we know we have to move forward. Thank you.
Maybe a few words from Vice President Dombrovskis, and then we will go on to the second topic.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you to panelists and the audience for your comments and suggestions. Events in the recent months confirm that enhanced transatlantic cooperation is essential for us to be able to confront evolving global context and to withstand risks. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has highlighted dramatically the relevance of our joint commitment to address trade and security risks associated with export of sensitive technologies to destinations of concern, notably Russia. The TTC has played an important role in coordination of the unprecedented set of sanctions against Russia, in particular in area of export controls. Looking forward, our intention is also to continue that level of engagement to discuss how to mitigate the negative impacts of this aggression on the global economy and on Ukrainian economy in particular. Well, the transatlantic marketplace is large and deep. Our economic prosperity was built on global openness, and well-functioning transatlantic trade is key for resilient supply chains. So our shared work to promote resilience and security of supply chains and our cooperation to mitigate vulnerabilities should not give the sense that we are withdrawing from the globalization. On the contrary, we continue engaging in partnership with spirit of openness, seeking ways to cooperate, whereby we protect our economic interests in a way that is not putting additional pressure on world economy, and also by upholding and reforming global rules-based trading system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to the second topic. So the second topic, how can the TTC facilitate the green and digital transitions? An important topic. I'll give the floor to Secretary Raimondo for introductory comments. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you to all of you for being here, and thank you to our hosts. I think I can confidently state that Paris is a fantastic place to have any event, and you've done a wonderful job hosting the second TTC. Before I talk about the green and digital transition, I do want to comment on something that has struck me as I've listened to our stakeholders, which is that, and it should give all of you stakeholders some assurance, every issue that came up from the stakeholders, whether it is standards, achievement of equity as it relates to, as we move towards digital world, coordination on export controls, focusing on the food crisis, all the semiconductors, coordination of our plans on semiconductors, every issue brought up by stakeholders was on our agenda this morning and yesterday for TTC. And I know that was validating for me, because if we're working on the things that are important to the stakeholders, then we're doing it right. And I hope you have some comfort to know that the issues top of mind for the stakeholders are the issues on which we are most focused. So I wanted to make that point. This issue of facilitating the green and digital transition is, of course, an extremely important one. Inequality was brought up in the prior panel. We certainly in the US are struggling with income inequality and equality of opportunity. And if we don't do it right, the digital transition and the green transition will make that inequality even worse. And so we have to be cognizant of that reality and make sure that as we move, as we have to, speedily, especially as it relates to the green transition, we are putting in place the supports and the policies that we need to ensure greater equality. Because left to our own devices, we run the risk of increasing inequality. An area that I am particularly focused on as Commerce Secretary relates to broadband. And on last Friday, I announced an initiative led by President Biden to make a $65 billion investment in the United States to ensure that every single American has access to high-speed, high-quality, affordable internet. Unfortunately, tens of millions of Americans, millions of Europeans don't now have that. And the reality is that lack of broadband, and this is one example, and there are many, lack of broadband in a digital world will massively exacerbate inequality. So if we're going to bring about our digital transition and reduce inequality and close the digital divide, then we have to support people. And a simple example of that is making sure every SME, every individual business owner, every person, every student, every farmer has affordable internet. And so that's an initiative that we are bringing about. I know similar initiatives are taking place here in the EU, and I think it's necessary for true digital equity. Much of the work that we're doing at the TTC underpins these goals of green and digital transition and doing it in a way which brings about equity and sustainability. I just want to highlight the work of two of our working groups. By the way, this gives me an opportunity to say thank you to the working groups, the working group heads, many of whom are here. We, of course, are on the stage touting your great work, which happens, starting tomorrow. The working groups begin with all the do-outs from today. So thank you for your hard work. One example, we have a working group called Global Trade Challenges. Global Trade Challenges Working Group. They're seeking to shape the positive opportunities and mitigate the negative impacts of digital trade on EU and US workforces, including, for example, and this was brought up before, areas of worker protections and the status of workers in the digital economy. So vitally important. Another working group is called the Climate and Clean Tech Working Group, which in conjunction with Trade Challenges Working Group is undertaking an effort to intensify EU-US cooperation in the area of public procurement of environmental goods and technologies. Two absolutely vital areas. They've made huge progress already, and we look forward to our next TTC, which will happen in early winter or late autumn, where they will come to us with policy recommendations on these topics. A final word, and this is just cannot be said enough. Everything that we're talking about here relates importantly to SMEs. And we discussed this morning, the biggest companies in general have the resources and wherewithal to figure things out, figure out how to work within new standards, figure out how to work globally, figure out how to train. It's the smaller companies that we have to ensure aren't left out of opportunities, whether that is procurement, whether that is skills, whether that is technology, talent, and resources. So we all are especially committed in the stakeholder engagement to hearing from the voices of smaller entities and actually workers individually, because at the end of the day, that's the whole purpose of what we're doing here. So we're excited to hear from our stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Exit. Vice President Dombrovskis, the floor is yours.
First of all, a successful green transition and fight against climate change is important policy priority on both sides of the Atlantic. So I therefore would like to use this opportunity to highlight the TTC's contribution to our broader sustainability agenda. Because ensuring a just transition towards resilient and green economy is an important theme in all TTC working groups. So already in Pittsburgh, we equipped TTC with a strong social sustainability dimension, and in Paris we are further strengthening. Most notably, at today's meeting, we agreed to coordinate in international fora on promotion of responsible business practices, and we have set up a trade and labor dialogue, tripartite trade and labor dialogue, including social partners. Which obviously will then give social partners a strong voice in transatlantic relations, because we want to ensure that green and digital transitions are just. We also agree to mitigate the impact of digital trade on the EU and US workforces, and more immediately to address social and economic implications of Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. Now let me move to another just as significant side of the work on sustainable trade. Also there we are making important advancements, so I'm pleased that now we have agreed on environment and climate agenda in our working group 10 on global trade challenges, so we now have a concrete work plan. Because that's indeed an area where we could take clear actions to facilitate green transition and address environmental challenges through trade facilitation. Internationally, we agreed to cooperate on the WTO statement on trade and environmental sustainability structured discussions, and we should also find ways to better enable circular approaches, including trade facilitation in relation to remanufacturing, refurbishing, repair, and direct reuse. We also agreed to exchange information on implementation of environment-related provisions on our respective trade agreements and our respective rules and initiatives in relation to sustainable fisheries management and combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Well, this green work plan will complement additional work which is going on other working groups. Secretary Raimondo already mentioned green public procurement, which are advancing in climate and clean tech working group. The work is ongoing on carbon footprinting methodologies and on electromobility. On electromobility, I would particularly emphasize, since it's now rapidly being rolled out on both sides of the Atlantic, if we manage to agree to compatible charging standards and correspondingly charging infrastructure, that would be a major boost for this rollout. And we're working also on supply chain resilience related to the green transition, including clean energy and critical materials. So overall, the objective is to accelerate the deployment of green goods and technologies in transatlantic marketplace, but also, of course, work broader. So I will probably stop here. The question I would be interested to hear from panelists and audience is what you are seeing as a priorities for advancement under the TTC trade and environment and climate agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. We have now statements from panelists, some online and Frank Helmskerk here. Can you please try to stick to max 2 minutes so we can do the press conference afterwards? I think journalists are hungry as well, so we don't want to keep any hungry journalists. So the floor is yours. Frank Helmskerk, Secretary General of the European Roundtable for Industry.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a bit lonely in the panel here. For those of you who are in the panel online, you are really missing out on something. Also, the gender balance on stage is also hasn't changed in the second panel either. But if you come by bike and by train, you do pretty good on your sustainability footprint, like I did this morning. The European Roundtable for Industry is quite happy with the TTC. Together with my counterpart, Josh Bolton, from the Business Roundtable, we will also publicly launch a supportive statement. Of course, we can always do better. Like Maren, like Marcus, we would like to ask for a bit more structured, less last-minute dialogue, because I'm convinced we can share practical cross-sectorial insights. But let's also count our blessings. It's very important and good to have this transatlantic dialogue. This US administration is fortunately taking a much different approach than the previous one. I don't know whether I say this also on behalf of the US Business Roundtable, but at least it's my view. On green and digital, a few comments. Let's, as transatlantic coalition, also jointly set global rules and standards. Let's continue to build on and modernize the WTO. Let's seek a new multilateral agreement on environmental goods. And let's make sure that we align the environmental standards incorporated in our free trade agreements. And in order to address the risks of carbon leakage, let's work together on level playing field mechanisms and aim to bring carbon prices closer together in both our markets and globally. Then some of our message on digital. Also there, let's cooperate on new areas of regulation, especially for emerging technologies such as AI and 6G, based on our shared values. Minimize fragmentation is key. Enhance the cooperation in cybersecurity. Also there, we recently had a call with our corporate global heads of cyber. They were worried because it was so quiet on cyber. Maybe it's also a bit of their profession to always be worried. But what I took away was that the quality of their dialogue of the European multinationals with the American intelligence environment was more productive than the European. So let's also there deal with the European fragmented approach on cyber intelligence. And even if it's not part of TTC, like Maren, it's key to finalize the transatlantic data privacy framework to replace the privacy shields. And my final comment is on sanctions and export controls. Also here, the trust and cooperation within the TTC has paid off. As ERT, we are fully supportive on sanctions. But let's, however, also make clear that interpretation and information on sanctions is clear and consistent across sectors and countries. And when designing these sanctions, they should hurt the Putin clan much more than they hurt us. But I'm also sure that here the transatlantic dialogue leads to better mutual understanding and collective actions. So congratulations on the work done. On the agenda ahead, I think 80% of the work has been done and 80% still to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Alessia Virone from the Clean Air Task Force.
To this event. I will try to keep it short since I understand.
Yeah, perfect.
You can hear me?
Now, yes, please. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thanking you for the invitation to this event and saying that I was going to keep it short, as I understand the audience is starting to be hungry. So, Clean Air Task Force is an NGO working on both sides of the Atlantic, so we very much welcome the opportunity to discuss EU-US trade and climate relations. Historically, the transatlantic cooperation has been a driving force to move climate discussion and diplomacy around the world. So we really see a lot of opportunity for climate and clean tech cooperation across the two sides of the Atlantic. At the moment, we are facing several crises, but the most recent one, to not make us forget the ongoing climate crisis that still remain very much an urgent priority. Both the EU and the US are aiming toward climate neutrality in the upcoming decades. And so we're going to face several challenges, and we have the ability to learn from each other to support the decarbonization process. As a first step, we're very happy to see the development of the Climate and Green Tech Working Group, and we see several topics that will need to be addressed in this working group to make sure that trade and climate between the two sides of the Atlantic are closely as possible, closely aligned across the two sides of the Atlantic. The first point is going to concern regulation. At the moment, both the US and the EU have the same goal, but they don't always have the same approach. And so a dialogue and discussion on several key points is going to be very useful. And among the topics to discuss, we see issues such as carbon pricing and carbon leakage that have already been mentioned, but also discussing methodology for greenhouse gas emission assessment in key trade projects. Similarly, issues as climate dumping would be worth a discussion between the two sides of the Atlantic. So that's on the part on regulation. Another point that we need discussion is related to innovation. We need to remember that a large part of the technology that will be needed for decarbonization are not yet developed to scale and are not always ready for market. So we need to discuss how we can support each other in the development of this technology within innovation and research, and make sure that we align where possible. the TTC should support the EU and the US in reaching joint leadership for this green and clean technology that will be needed in the future, and should also discuss how this technology can be traded and developed within the transatlantic country, but also with third countries and partners. So first point, regulation, second point, innovation, and the third point that I want to make is related to international coordination. By aligning the position bilaterally before presenting and promoting them on the international stage, the EU and the US can prove extremely convincing, and I think that we saw again recently with the Global Latent Pledge, for example, that when they work together, the EU and the US really have a lot of weight internationally to move the global agenda on climate and sustainability. So now is really the perfect time to review the agenda and build a productive bilateral partnership and policy collaboration in the area of trade, clean tech, and climate change. And I'm very much looking forward to following these developments. Thank you.
Many thanks. Many thanks. I'll ask Kathy Feingold from the AFL-CIO, and please be very short, all of you. We're running out of time, so we might have to cut some of the interventions if they're not shorter now. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, and thank you for inviting the US and the EU unions. Let me start with a few ideas on digitalization and then turn to the green transition. In the absence of government regulation, technology companies collect data from workers and consumers, which is then analyzed, packaged, and sold to third parties without knowledge or consent. We believe there needs to be a rights-based collective approach to data and data privacy, and that should be part of the TTC agenda. Companies often use invasive surveillance technologies and AI algorithms to monitor workers and increase work speed, leading to stressed out employees, increased injuries, and high rates of worker turnover. To address these challenges, we need a transatlantic digital commitment to enforcing workers' rights through the inclusive and ongoing governance of digital technologies within and across national boundaries. This should include mandatory human and worker rights assessments. These are key to any governance model, which has to be ongoing. Certification would just be a snapshot in time. You need ongoing monitoring. The TTC is an ideal forum for these discussions. On the green transition and the just transition, it's vital that both governments' policies and investments create resilient supply chains for green energy goods that end our dependence on products made with forced labor and dirty energy. We must also develop joint skills programs across the Atlantic. In the US, just a few weeks ago, history was made when North America's building trades unions and Ørsted US, the US leader in offshore wind energy, announced a project labor agreement to construct the company's US offshore wind farms with an American union workforce. This agreement was made possible with transatlantic partnerships between unions and pension funds in the US and Denmark. It sets a model for how we should be working together, and it sets a bar for working conditions and equity, creates apprenticeship programs and career opportunities for communities most impacted by environmental injustice. This is a great model that should be duplicated to ensure we build a clean energy transition with union jobs that also extend into manufacturing. We look forward to working with the TTC to strengthening the transatlantic conversation with our union counterparts as well as business and government. Thank you.
Thank you. We have now Brian Scarpelli from ACT, the App Association.
Hello, thank you. My name is Brian Scarpelli, Senior Global Policy Counsel with ACT, the App Association. We are an international not-for-profit trade association representing thousands of small business application developers and connected device companies located across the United States and the European Union, and we're honored to participate in today's EU-US Trade and Technology Council meeting as a panelist on this important topic, and congratulate both the EU and the US on their leadership and progress, both before and since the Pittsburgh meeting across the TTC's working groups. We particularly appreciate Secretary Raimondo's comments on the value of small businesses and agree their inclusion in the TTC process is vital. The small business innovator community that the App Association represents believes that the green and digital transitions are crucial for both the EU and US economies and EU U.S. relations and are an opportunity for global leadership. Small businesses and startups that we represent and will continue to be essential to a successful green and digital transition and the mitigation of disparities and inequities. The App Association also believes that the TTC must contribute to the twin transition by developing common objectives and methodologies to achieve it in the most relevant areas. The TTC can and should serve as a forum to ensure that this twin transition benefits citizens and businesses alike, particularly small businesses, by building a transatlantic environment to support innovation and investment by, among other steps, reducing trade tensions for the digital economy, namely, in our view, by ensuring transatlantic data flows through the newly announced transatlantic data privacy framework, as well as in areas such as export controls, supporting digital transformations that are critical to advancing access and equity, efficiencies and decarbonization goals, and enabling rapid scaling up of breakthrough technologies in areas like artificial intelligence and others by small businesses and startups between the EU and US. Small business and startup innovator community that we represent, the App Association, we're committed to the green and digital transition. We, again, appreciate the opportunity to participate here, and we look forward to working with the EU, the US, and all other stakeholders moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And Patricia Heidegger from the European Environmental Bureau.
Thank you very much for inviting us to today's exchange. I represent the largest federation of environmental organizations in Europe. Digital technologies have advanced more rapidly than any other innovation in human history, and they must be anchored in fundamental rights and serve the protection of the environment and the climate. They need to be able to operate within the carrying capacity of the planet, but also the coping capacity of humans. So digitalization helps all sectors in the green transition to become more efficient, but at the same time, it also carries an enormous environmental and social justice impact of its own. Mining for and the manufacturing of devices and infrastructure they daily use, and massive data centers increasingly contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. Digital technology and electrification come with increasing demand for critical raw materials. The EU's projected lithium demand for 2050 is higher than what the whole world uses today. So this will inevitably lead to more mining conflicts globally, to more dependency on undemocratic regimes who are ready to exploit workers, to let go of environmental protections, or even use military force to secure raw materials. So what we need to do is to also prioritize solutions that need fewer resources. For instance, shared and public modes of transport instead of the continuous expansion of individual cars. So we expect the EU and the US in this forum to work together to adopt measures that reduce the overconsumption of digital and other high-impact technology to bring down energy and raw material demand. One way forward is that products must become more sustainable through smart product design, clear repairability and longevity standards, and extended producer responsibility, combined with a digital product passport with robust information. Let me give you just one illustration of the vast potential. We calculated that extending the lifetime of washing machines, notebooks, vacuum cleaners, and smartphones in the EU by only 1 year would result in CO2 savings equivalent to taking over 2 million cars off the road every year. So beyond better products, we need to adopt ambitious recycling rates and heavily upscale urban mining for the raw materials necessary for the green and digital transition. Next to emission targets that we've already adopted at the global scale, we need targets for the reduction of material use. And one last point, a small number of tech companies yield too much power. They flaunt environmental rules, they avoid fiscal environmental duties, including extended producer responsibility. So the EU and the US must cooperate to ensure tech companies face the same rules as other sectors. All these measures will help the transatlantic partners to lead on innovation and to become more sufficient and independent regarding raw materials. Together, we believe the EU and the US can and must drive the smart green digital transition globally that is oriented towards human and planetary well-being. Thank you.
We now have questions from the audience here and people as well online who woke up early this morning, US time. I'll give the floor to Edmund Mierzwinski from the Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue. Please, 2 minutes maximum. Thank you.
Thank you. The Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue is the oldest civil society dialogue advising the governments. We have got a comprehensive regulatory cooperation agenda we've already submitted, and we obviously care a great deal about the digital and green transition. I want to focus only on one aspect of our position, and that is the need to give consumers a comprehensive right to repair their own stuff and help us move toward a sustainable circular economy. Products with unnecessary restrictions on repair tools lead consumers to spend money replacing devices instead of repairing them. They harm our planet by contributing to our rapidly growing electronic waste program. Things are made worse by the big tech focus on adding many more things to the Internet of Things. Both the US and the EU have strong civil society right to repair movements led by consumers and small businesses. A lot, but it's not much that corporations have done to respond to demands for a right to repair has been in response to that civil society leadership. Much has already been done on both sides of the Atlantic, however. The Biden administration and the U.S. Federal Trade Commission have made right to repair an important part of their competition agenda. France has an important new law with repairability index. The U.S. has taken steps to improve a consumer's right to repair, but more needs to be done. Will the TTC deal with the problem that big tech would rather make more stuff that cannot be fixed at home and is designed to be bricked and thrown away after inadequate software updates? A sustainability agenda that stops the climate journey. The climate emergency means we must have better stuff that lasts longer and ends planned obsolescence. How else can the TTC help? Will the TTC do more to reach out to consumer and repair stakeholders who are already working with farmers to improve their right to repair their tractors, and medical technicians who want a right to technical information so they can fix their COVID ventilators? Will the governments do more to give EU and US consumers a comprehensive right to repair based on improving product design, consumer information, repair services, and guarantee rights? TACD.org looks forward to working with the two governments and other stakeholders going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. One of you, if you want to answer, maybe? Briefly.
This is really good because I think it's an add-on to some of the discussions that we have had. It may be me, but I don't think that we have been sufficiently precise on, for instance, our talks on raw materials. We're talking about access to raw materials, mining of raw materials, environmental in mining raw materials, but not sufficiently about the circularity and about the right to repair, the right for people actually to maintain their products, but to have them repaired. And I think these are excellent points because the demand for raw material will increase no matter what. So circularity must indeed be part of it. Also, what I was told the other day about the electrification of mines. So you have electrical vehicles that autonomous can work the mines, which will prevent, a lot of hazard for workers, and of course also limit the footprint of mining in itself. So I think there is a lot to be done. We've been talking a lot about standards, but we have not been discussing standards in shared transportation. The interoperability between different transport modes, how to enable people to go from one part of transport to another, and how for vehicles to be prepared for that. I think the last point here made, and the made by Patricia, is an add-on to what we have been discussing so far on both raw materials and circularity, because also the build-up of this part of industry where what was waste, what is now resources, is the core. I think that is also something that could be enabled in the transatlantic relationship. So I would like to thank you for this inspiration, and if there is agreement, we would more than happy to focus on that. And at least for me, this is, again, a very specific token of appreciation of stakeholder outreach, that we learn something every time we talk together. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Meg Gentle from Innovative Fuels USA. Can you jump straight to the question? Would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, merci beaucoup. Thank you for including me today. I do want to say that I'm representing HIF, which stands for Highly Innovative Fuels. We are a global company producing e-fuels. E-fuels are renewable hydrocarbons that are made from green hydrogen and carbon dioxide captured from the atmosphere. They do not come out of the ground. They're considered a drop-in fuel because they're chemically identical to their fossil fuel counterparts, and therefore can be used in ships, cars, airplanes in use today without modifying existing infrastructure. They go hand in hand with electric vehicles to accelerate decarbonization and improve global energy security, because e-fuels can be produced in locations with renewable energy sources that have low political risk and safely deliver to demand centers in US and Europe, displacing traditional fossil fuels. We can enable investment in these renewable fuels by creating standards for carbon accounting and carbon markets. And so my question today is, how can we work together to create or influence public policy that is the same in Europe and the United States on carbon accounting and carbon markets that allows connectivity with electricity grids to balance the intermittency of renewable energy and enable baseload production of green technologies like e-fuels at a lower cost?
Yes.
Look, thank you for your question. We are looking and will continue to look on the energy front at a number of options, and this is obviously one of them. At the end of the day, what we are facing today just shows us that we need to redouble our efforts on renewable energy sources and cutting down on fossil fuels. And what you're proposing is one option to do that. So I think the lesson is all options are on the table. This is one, and thank you for bringing it up, and this is one issue that we will definitely continue to explore. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll take the three last questions. Can you please come to the microphone? I'll have Cecilia Bonfeld-Dahl from Digital Europe, and then I'll take the three questions in a row, so if you want to come. And so we can, Elvire Fabry from l'Institut Jacques Delors, and Jason Oxman from ITI. If you want to come to the microphone, we'll take the three questions so we can wrap up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this second invitation to the TTC. A big thank you especially to Vice President Vestager and Secretary Raimondo for really leading this work. I met you in the first days, and we really see that it's delivering. I think we can say that it has delivered, as we have heard, export controls, on sanctions, and not least also indirectly on the data flows. I would just highlight one of the comments made from my peers early on and refrain from repeating their previous comment. But cybersecurity and misinformation is reality, and something that is really close to people's heart at Europe at the moment. How do we collaborate better in sharing vulnerability to actually create a common governance model? Today we don't have that, and it is something that is the future of security, and it is really close to people's heart. Well, then if we look at two other things that are really close to people's heart, and would be the green transition and the security agenda. Unrest will come from environmental damage. Only in one day, in 2019, 12.5 billion tons of ice melted in Greenland.
and created 7 centimeters of water, enough to cover all of Germany. So the future of security policy is also environmental policy. And let me turn to being very specific on 2 things that we can actually do joint together. First, of course, the turning to renewable energy. If we look at what the attack by the Russians have done to the Nordic countries compared to the Eastern European country, this is a totally different situation. The Nordics more or less go free because we're based on renewable energy and technologies of the future, whereas I'm telling you, the Eastern European countries are not going to see the same stability as we are in the Nordic countries. Second, let me turn to an area where we can really move the needle. 40% of CO2 emissions comes from buildings. Europe is leading on technologies on how to bring down CO2 within buildings, how we actually construct them, how we maintain them, and how we actually tear them down. Let's put concrete targets on concrete sectors, and let's actually review the regulation that lead this. For example, the building directive.
Sorry, could you come to the question very fast? Thank you.
So maybe last but not least, let's look at how we can put common goals on communication. Undersecretary Fernandez, you asked, how can we reach the stakeholders? We have actually achieved 3 great things, but we have told very little about it. Use us, use your stakeholders. I have personally access to 40,000 small and medium-sized businesses. I am happy to tell the story, I do, but let's make common target here in this forum on how many did we reach and how did we tell the story. Thank you.
Elvire Fabry.
Good morning, thank you. I've got 2 questions, but they're very brief. First, I would like to go back on greening ICT. What concrete cooperation and coordination mechanism do the US and the EU intend to implement so that greening ICT is more than a slogan, and that EU and US actions in this field become a global benchmark? The first question. And the second one has to see with green subsidies. There is obviously great potential for raised subsidy and trade tensions as each side intensifies its direct support programs for the green transition. So while clean energy and technology subsidies are being challenged by WTO subsidy rules, how can we ensure that the EU and the US use the TTC to initiate discussions on the adoption of common principles and disciplines for green subsidies and manage the trade challenges related to green subsidies in international fora?
Thank you very much. Jason Oxman from ITI.
Thank you very much. And my question is related to technology standards. As Vice President Dombrovskis noted, industry-driven technology standards are enormously important. And I want to ask a question about how we can work together on those technology standards. Mais d'abord, un petit mot en français pour...
A brief word in French to thank our friends in the French government and the French presidency for hosting us here today.
Standards are actually very active within the EU. The EU itself supports ETSI and SEN and other related standards bodies. Secretary Raimondo's marvelous Commerce Department has within it NIST, more than 100-year-old organization that works on technology standards. So my question is, how can we work with the technology industry, which is very standards focused? ITI, in addition to being the technology industry's global trade association, is also an ANSI in the US and IEC in Europe, accredited standards body that works on technology standards. How can we move forward with the TTC in partnership with industry to help drive forward voluntary standards, particularly in the face of, shall we say, countries that don't necessarily share the values of the US and the EU, that may be pushing localization policies and country-specific technology standards that may not support European and US values? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If you want, maybe one of you.
Well, actually, these are the discussions that we've had. So it's really difficult to summarize them because I think you capture it really well. We have signed today what we call they're already starting abbreviating it, the Strategic Standardization Information Mechanism. And the point of this is basically to have, the merger between a war room and a spreadsheet that tells us where to focus in order to do the standardization work together. But the first part of that is knowing where does it take place, who's entering, precisely who are the businesses, the people moving in to set these standards. And that goes for green technology standards, obviously, as well. On the point of green subsidies, we have touched upon green procurement, because that has to be done well. There's a lot of potential, but it cannot be seen as a new version of protectionism. Telling anyone else that only we in a very close circle can actually trade with one another because we're the only ones who have these very high standards. It needs to be done in a way so that the procurement market is still open, so that green procurement is for real. And I think that's also a way of addressing the question of green subsidies. And last but not least, we have agreed on sort of principles to prevent subsidy races. That subsidies, they need to be only if necessary, proportionate, also to the private investment, and appropriate. And if it turns out well, here we are focusing on semiconductors, I think, of course, this is something that we can discuss. Well, could it work also in other areas, in particular to create more transparency? So I think there is a lot of food for thought here. In particular, I think we should take it as a challenge, how to take greening ICT from a slogan to something in real life. Because there will be no fighting climate change without digitization. But then, of course, digitization will have to be so much more resource efficient than what we see today. And that is from the very first minerals are mined for the chips to the electricity that goes into driving our computers and our clouds and our server parks. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a fantastic summary. The only point I would add on to is, Cecilia, your comment about communication. And today we have begun that discussion. TTC, although for some of us it feels like it's been around for a long time, we're 8 months old. This was our second meeting, but we had an extensive discussion this morning around how do we brand TTC? How do we communicate about TTC? And your point is an excellent one, which is how to use the stakeholders to broadcast the message as well as getting information from you. So rest assured, it's on the docket, and we'll be reaching out to each and every one of you to reach out to your networks to broadcast what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. We're concluding now, so we can have time for the presser. Any additional remarks from anyone? If not, thank you very much.
No, we need to say thank you again. We cannot end this without saying thank you once again, because everyone has come here. The working groups have delivered to enable this. We now have the work scoped for us until the next TTC. We're very much looking forward to the invitation. But I think we should really thank our French hosts for this organization. Thank you.
Ok, c'est bon. Ça y est.
Well, if I may try and answer with two different points.
Bon,
One point is
ils ont
to
le son, pas
say
de
that
problème.
we see the damages from the Russian invasion spreading across the world. I think a very good illustration of the fact that the war in Ukraine is not a European issue, it's indeed a global issue. And as you will see, the Trade and Technology Council has been really effective in the speed of sanctions, the depth of sanctions. We also, because of the work that we do together, see that there is more that we can do together to counter a false narrative in countries outside of Europe. For instance, about the reasons for food insecurity. The truth about food insecurity is that, you know, tons and tons and tons of grain are prevented from leaving Ukraine because of the war that the Russian invasion waged on Ukraine. And of course, we need that narrative to spread. And we agree to find ways to cooperate on this so that we can get the facts right and that people can actually get the real story. Second point, when it comes to information, is in another part of the work we do, and that is, of course, when it comes to platforms as such. We have separate legal systems, we have separate ways of dealing with things, but we will continue discussing how regulation is done with due respect to the differences. And that has nothing to do with freedom of expression, that has to do with the fact that the world is aligning on tech regulation as such. So I think it's really important to keep an open mind on this and to see what we can produce on ground when it comes to what we consider foreign interference with disturbed facts on ground also outside of Europe.
All right, the next question goes to Margaret Spiegelman in Inside Trade.
Vice President Vestager, you spoke just now about seeing, you said part of the green subsidies conversation has to do with green procurement. I was wondering if you could speak more about that. And more specifically, there had been language in a previous draft statement around the two sides potentially refraining from trade defense measures for green products. And I was wondering if you could please speak to sort of where that conversation specifically stands, and if on the US side, perhaps the US statutes around trade defense mechanisms would make such a pledge difficult, or if you could speak any more about what the challenges are and where you see the direction forward on that. Thank you.
Actually, I think this is more for Valdis on green procurement and trade defense, if you would take this.
Thank you, Margaret. Good afternoon, everyone. As regards this question of green public procurement, so we basically to agree to share best practices, in a sense to set a mapping of best practices, to share our policies in this area, because indeed, as you noted, if the green public procurement is done in a proper way, this can be facilitating the green transition. It can facilitate take-up of green technologies, reduce emissions. If it's done in a wrong way, it can be actually a tool for protectionism. That's why it's very important that we are comparing the notes. We are looking what are the best practices in area of promoting of this green public procurement, and do it in a way which is non-discriminatory and does not disrupt transatlantic value chains, and that we promote the same approach internationally.
Katherine. I'll just add, because you referenced from the U.S. side, I think that the conversation we've been having, and this goes to green and clean technologies and in industrial development, but I think it applies across the board to much of what we talk about in the TTC, which is the incentives that are present in the US and the EU market because of shared values and a shared vision for the kind of world we are building towards. How do we harness the existing tools that we have, procurement being a very powerful one that the government has, to shape those incentives. And on the flip side, how do we coordinate through this collaboration through the TTC to prevent each side from accidentally or intentionally interfering with those incentives across our market. So it has been a very, very robust conversation around the clean transition, the green transition, but I'd say that this is just one example and that the dynamic applies across the board to all of the conversation topics in the TTC.
Next question, Dan Michaels.
Thank you very much. Dan Michaels with the Wall Street Journal. A question for both sides. In areas of industrial cooperation like semiconductors that you're talking about, ultimately the companies involved, a lot of them are competitors. So how do you go beyond sort of high-level policy to getting potential competitors to work together and in a way that doesn't violate laws, obviously, but even within that, intellectual property often is a big concern of these companies and they don't want to share it. Thank you.
I would say we would never, fundamentally, supply chains of all kinds, including in semiconductors, are run by the private sector. And protection of IP is paramount. And that we would never do anything that would encourage companies to, violate the protection of their own IP. But it is in everyone's interest, every semiconductor company, indeed, all of Europe and all of America, for both the US and the EU to make investments in a coordinated way that deepen the entire ecosystem of the semiconductor supply chain. Everything from apprenticeships to worker training to investments in research and development, investments in design, software, fabs, packaging. And so what we've talked about, look, you'll even have European and US companies that are competing against each other. That is as it is, and this will not change that. But certain level of coordination aligned to the goal of expanding the ecosystem, I think, as I said, along all of those dimensions, will be good for both industries and certainly the national security and economic security of both of our countries.
To state the obvious, competition is good. Full stop, no but. This drives innovation. This will keep anyone on their toes. It keeps prices down. In a situation of high inflation, even more important than ever, also when we have the situation that we have right now. This is also why in Europe, we have a window for the establishment of first-of-a-kind facilities in Europe. So one shouldn't take that literally, that once you have a first, then there cannot be a second and a third. And right now, 3 different projects are being considered, which will compete with one another in Europe. And they will compete with other suppliers in the US and in other jurisdictions. What we can do is to make sure that, for instance, taxpayers' money, that they are well spent. We have agreed on the principles when it comes to subsidies, that they should only be given if necessary, proportionate to the private investing, and in an appropriate manner. And I think this is really important because to change and give more both depth and volume for the US and the EU in the semiconductor value chain, well, subsidies will be needed. But with these principles, we can prevent, we hope, a subsidy race so that taxpayers get value for money. And the second thing that we can do is to have these alert mechanisms to prevent a new shortage of semiconductors. We cannot do away with the shortage that is being experienced right now because it takes a bit of time to build capacity, but we can get to know why it happened. And here the analyses are really advanced, and we're setting up a pilot system in order to assess what should we look out for in order to prevent new shortages. Because there is a government role in a crisis situation, just as well as there is business responsibility to be lifted. And the last thing that we can do is to work with the industry when it comes to the provision of raw materials. in order for those who provide raw materials to have a long-term perspective, and because of that, for investment to go up. Both when it comes to acquiring new raw material, for instance, from Canada, from Australia, but also when it comes to sort of mining in existing products, the circularity of raw materials. Also here to create the incentives for that industry really to take off. Because raw materials will increase in demand, but it cannot be that we discard of raw materials just because they've been used for once. So that's another part of that raw material focus that we will have within the TTC.
Our last question goes to Jorge Valero at Bloomberg.
Thank you very much. Jorge Valero with Bloomberg. I have two questions. The first one is whether you consider that the TTC format should focus on fewer topics to achieve more concrete results, because of course there are many calls for deeper cooperation, more dialogue, but when it comes to specific results, maybe there could be space for more progress. And secondly, whether you will consider that there should be a more forceful response to non-market economies like China, taking advantage of this format.
Well, maybe to respond to the first question, what we agree is that the TTC should remain a flexible and agile format, that we are able to discontinue some discussions if results are reached or for whatever reasons we are not making progress, and we are able to introduce new work streams which are of high relevance. Like, for example, now in this TTC we are introducing a new work stream dealing with food security issues, which had become very topical following Russia's invasion against Ukraine. So I would say it's not so much a question about narrowing down a TTC, because what you see here is only principles, but there are 10 working groups, there are working group co-chairs, there are lots of people actually working in those various work streams and delivering results, and that's important. And indeed, so when we talk about Trade and Technology Council, it covers actually quite a broad range of different policy areas, and I think if we are able to deliver across those policy areas, there is no point in narrowing down, and this focus on non-market economies is very much there since the very beginning, notably if you look, for example, on our cooperation on global trade challenges. And I would say now the war in Russia has focused once again, for example, of making sure that advanced sensitive technologies are not getting into countries of concern like Russia. So this is a whole work stream which we were able to develop very fast, actually thanks to the prior cooperation in TTC. Thank you.
Yes. I would just echo that. I mean, already in 8 months, the TTC has shown both results, concrete results, and allowed us to push back against the horrible behavior of non-market economy in Russia. I mean, frankly, the export controls that we together are imposing on Russia along, in consortia with 37 countries is a direct result of the groundwork that was laid here at the TTC. A working group of the TTC is coordination of export controls, and because of that work, we were able to immediately come together and hammer Russia with extreme export controls and essentially cutting them off from all the advanced technology that they need to conduct their military operation. And that's just one outcome of the work of TTC. Another thing we're working on, and we had extensive discussion about, is technology standards. We talked extensively today and signed an agreement about how we're going to work together to align our technology standards in a way that's consistent with our democratic values. Non-market economies, if they control international standard-setting bodies, it's a very powerful way to lock out the US and the EU. And so we are going to work together to make sure we show up at those standard-setting bodies and we together align on tech standards.
and now we're on a roll. You really shouldn't have done this because we will fall upon you with all the things that we think that we have achieved. Because I would put the TTC brand both on the export controls, on the principles for subsidies, on the strategic standard information mechanism, on the pilot on semiconductor shortages, on the common approach to artificial intelligence, on how to counter a malign use of information, and I think for our stakeholders also create predictability. It may be intangible, but at the same time really concrete. Because I think it's your metaphor, Katherine, we have set more chairs at the table. We have been listening to the business community, to the unions, to consumers, to environmentalists, and that's the kind of ownership that we're looking for. This is the TTC brand. So we have the very concrete deliverables, we have the intangible deliverables, but I think they're very concrete for our stakeholders because in a world like this, more predictability, that is what creates momentum for them also to take their own decisions.
And just to further the role then, down the stage here, your question about non-market economies, I wanted to put a special point on because that has been a very central part of our trade collaboration and conversation in the TTC. And you asked whether or not we are looking at more forceful reactions to non-market economies. And I understand, I can guess why you're focusing on the forceful, but I want to focus on effective responses to non-market economic practices. And, we started looking at non-market economic practices that are really the state's outsized influence in certain very, very large economies, like China's, on the market and on the economy. But we have demonstrating the agility and the adaptability of the TTC also expanded to include our responses to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And in fact, I think the reason why this invasion really challenges the version of globalization we have right now is, under the theory that the more we trade, the less we will go to war with each other. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is, from an economic standpoint, a non-market decision. This invasion results in a shrinking pie for not just Russia, not just Ukraine, not just the European Union, but for the entire world. And that has created even more work for us. And we've said good work, results. The reward for that is more work and more results. And we have to be adaptable to what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
This concludes our press conference. Thank you very much indeed for the co-chairs for your time. Thank you for your interest. Have a nice
Thank you.
Okay. Excellent.